A quarter of NFL teams no longer have head coaches. Which big-name coordinators are finally going to get their shot? Plus, NFL playoffs kick off this weekend, and we're going to talk about what your team needs to do to win. It's all coming up next on the Grey Duck Football Show. Well, hello and welcome to the first ever episode of the Grey Duck Football Show. I am Josh Kolodziejski, your host for this fine program, and we have a lot to cover on what is probably the busiest week of the NFL season. You've got the head coach firings, the head coach interviews. Black Monday has leaked all the way over into Black Thursday, and of course, as we mentioned at the top, NFL Wild Card Weekend, Super Wild Card Weekend kicks off on Saturday, so we'll have to preview all of those games. But first, we'll get you started with some news today. As we said, Black Monday bleeding into Black Thursday, and that's because, we had a head coach fired on Tuesday, and now we have had a head coach fired on Thursday, and that is Mike McDaniel of the Miami Dolphins. Was informed that he was not going to be coaching the team after a couple of days ago. The reports were that he was going to be heavily involved in the head coaching, the general manager search with the organization. He's not going to play any role with the organization any longer. He is now a free agent, and Miami now has the 8th open coaching spot. We'll go through those again. Baltimore, Atlanta, Las Vegas, Cleveland, New York, the Giants, Miami, Tennessee, and Arizona. Those are your 8 vacancies right now, and many of these teams have already begun to interview their candidates and have begun to request to interview some other coordinators who may or may not be in the playoffs. We're going to talk about what the most desirable location is for any head coach. And then we're going to talk about the best fits and who I think should be the head coach. It's not necessarily predictions, but it's my take on what I would think and what I would do if I was the general manager of each of these teams. Of course, if we start with which of these options is the most desirable for a first-time head coach or even a former washout to get their second chance, it's got to be Baltimore. It's got to be working with a group of established players that underperformed this year, and one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL in Lamar Jackson. You have an aging Derrick Henry, and you have some good receivers, not any standout great receivers, but you have a toolbox to work with if you want to come to the Baltimore Ravens. And the Ravens, I think for any head coach, new or old, would be the top spot, their top choice. And 3 of the guys that I think the Ravens are either reportedly interested in or have already interviewed that could be the finalists for this head coaching job is Davis Webb, Kevin Stefanski, and Clint Kubiak. All of these guys, offensive guys. I think on the defensive side of the football, you bring in a good defensive coordinator, and you've got plenty of names, plenty of guys on that defense that Kyle Hamilton can all pull together and make great again. Even though they didn't have their best season this past year, they still have good bones to work with and good tools to work with. I think if you are the Baltimore Ravens, what you are wanting to do is maximize what Lamar Jackson can do in what really is now kind of the middle of his prime, the peak of his career. He's as good as he's ever going to be, and you want a guy that is an offensive guru that can really take advantage of that and bring this offense to new heights, even though it's been one of the best offenses in the league since Lamar Jackson took over. And that's why all 3 of these guys are offensive coordinators. And if you are Baltimore and you have the top spot, I think you go with the guy that is the top name in this coaching cycle outside of maybe John Harbaugh, who obviously you're not going to bring back, and that would be Kevin Stefanski, the 2-time head coach of the year winner. Plus, Baltimore has already stolen the Cleveland Browns football team back in the 90s, so why not steal their head coach? I think he will design a great offensive system for Lamar Jackson to maximize not only what he can do as a runner, but what he can do as a thrower, and really make this offense click. And we've seen Kevin Stefanski operate in tumult, and when things aren't going great, have success. 2023, great example of that. Deshaun Watson gets injured, and Joe Flacco comes up. They lead the team to the playoffs. That's what you're getting with Kevin Stefanski. You're not giving a guy that will go down easily. He's going to fight throughout the course of the season, even when things are bad, even like that this year when Lamar Jackson gets injured. And you have to rely on Tyler Huntley or Cooper Rush for a little bit. He can help you weather that storm. And then once everything's running on full cylinders, he's one of the best that there is. So I think Kevin Stefanski to Baltimore is my number one spot if I am making the decisions for the Baltimore Ravens. Going down to the number 2 head coaching vacancy, the one that I think is the second most desirable, it would be the Atlanta Falcons. And I've seen like the New York Giants, the Cleveland Browns because of the young talent that they have there, but Atlanta also has a lot of really young talent, including on that defense. When you have James Pierce and you have Xavier Watts and you bring in Jalen Walker, and all of those guys having tremendous rookie campaigns. Xavier Watts with the 5 interceptions and the 1 fumble recovery. He was all over the place. That defense is built. The offense is in a pretty good spot as well. Darnell Mooney and Bijan Robinson. And you're hoping that Drake London, obviously. And you're hoping that Michael Penix can be that guy and take that next step up going into the 2026 season. Now, I don't know when Penix will be ready to play with his injury, missing the last half of the season. But if he is ready to play, then you've got a young quarterback that you want your head coach to work with. And some names that I have here for the Atlanta Falcons, once again, Clint Kubiak. Remember now, Kevin Stefanski in this scenario off the table. I think Kevin Stefanski would be a good candidate for all of these jobs, but we have taken him off the table and given him to the Baltimore Ravens. Joe Brady would be another one. I think both Clint Kubiak and Joe Brady have their strengths in what they do. I think Joe Brady is excellent at diversifying and changing up his route concepts for his quarterback and finding ways to scheme people open and combining route concepts. I saw a tweet where he's combining the dagger concept with the mesh concept with the Y-cross concept all in one play to try and create openings for Josh Allen to throw to against zone and man coverage. So you're getting that creativity, and then obviously Clint Kubiak, outside zone, wide zone, disciple of his father and disciple of Mike Shanahan. He would be a good option for them as well, especially because that is what Atlanta had run almost exclusively this past year, and what had found Bijan Robinson get so much success was running in that wide zone system. So he would be a good option, but so would John Harbaugh. And I think you want a guy that will bring in good offensive coordinators and good defensive coordinators, or at least offensive and defensive coordinators that he trusts. You want the CEO. And that's what John Harbaugh had been in Baltimore for his entire tenure. He was a special teams coordinator prior to becoming the head coach with the Ravens, and then he always hired good offensive coordinators and good defensive coordinators, let them do that, and he was concerned about with fixing or keeping a good team culture and a good locker room atmosphere and just being an overall good leader. And he got him to the AFC Championship game in his first season at the helm. So I think John Harbaugh is the choice here. I think because you don't have to fix the offense, you don't have to fix the defense, you can afford to go this route. You're in a good spot in both of those places. You bring in an established guy like John Harbaugh, and a guy that also, by the way, Matt Ryan, who is rumored to be the favorite for the Falcons general manager position, a guy that he's familiar with. He entered the league as a quarterback the same year that John Harbaugh got his head coaching job, and the same year that John Harbaugh also brought in a rookie quarterback, Joe Flacco. So Matt Ryan with some familiarity there, going to go with the big name, and that would be John Harbaugh to the Atlanta Falcons. All right, now here's where things get a little bit interesting, and I think a place that can be a fun little sandbox would be the Las Vegas Raiders. It is a complete and utter disaster there. So maybe this isn't the more desirable spot, but for coaches and coordinators that have big egos and think they can fix even the most dire of circumstances, well, here you go. Las Vegas is right here for you, and it will give a lot of retread head coaches, I think, an opportunity. I think it'll give an opportunity for more of the younger, unknown coordinators to have a shot. Like, not the guys like Joe Brady and Clint Kubiak that are getting the big-time offers right now, but the guys like Grant Udinski, who I think would be really a phenomenal choice for Las Vegas. I'm not saying that that would be my choice, but I think he would be in my top 3. And for those of you that don't know, Grant Udinski is the offensive coordinator with the Jacksonville Jaguars, and I know Liam Cohen kind of runs the show over there, just like he did when he was leading Tampa Bay's offense. But Udinski, prior to becoming Jacksonville's offensive coordinator, was the assistant quarterbacks coach under Josh McCown and Kevin Stefanski in Minnesota. And being a Minnesota Vikings fan, which I am, seeing a lot of reports or thoughts around that team that it wasn't necessarily Kevin Stefanski who was the major quarterback whisperer, and it wasn't Josh McCown or Wes Phillips. It was Grant Udinski as that number 1 quarterback whisperer, and he should have gotten a lot of the credit, at least, for fixing Sam Darnold and turning him into now a perennial Pro Bowl quarterback. So Udinski is a good option, especially because the Raiders have the number 1 pick. I'm guessing Tom Brady is going to be very involved in which quarterback he takes, whether it be Dante Moore or Fernando Mendoza, if Moore ends up declaring. And now you get to pair him with a quarterback whisperer that can really bring out all of his highlights and hide his flaws. And really, we've seen that kind of work with Trevor Lawrence in Jacksonville this year when they were doing a broadcast of the Jaguars game, either week 16 or week 17. They mentioned the footwork change for Trevor Lawrence from last year to this year. And at the beginning of the season, I was kind of out on Trevor Lawrence, especially in that Rams game overseas. He looked like he just wasn't seeing the ball, or the field, rather, well at all. And I had been a big proponent of Trevor Lawrence coming into the season and thought, oh, well, that is it. Maybe Udinski wasn't the big quarterback whisperer. But I think it was that change in footwork. And really, it was just mostly a simple change on what foot you put behind you from the shotgun, is what I think they highlighted on the broadcast. I think adjusting to that caused some more inaccuracies for Trevor Lawrence, clouded his mind a little bit more because it gave him more to think about on each drop back. But this second half of the season, everything has fallen into place, and Trevor Lawrence looks like the guy that we thought he would be when he was drafted number 1 overall in 2021. And I think a big credit to that is not only Liam Cohen and his play calling, but also Grant Udinski, the quarterback whisperer. Give him a chance with Dante Moore or Fernando Mendoza, and you're in good shape. However, this is also a Raiders team that really has nothing going for it on the defensive side of the football. And you can hire a good offensive coordinator. I think you want a guy that can both fix the team culture and fix the defense. Jesse Minter would be one of those options, but I think a little bit more fun and a little bit more connected to Tom Brady would be Brian Flores. And I understand that there is the lawsuit against the NFL that is still ongoing that Brian Flores has with the Giants and the Dolphins, 2 teams that also have head coach openings now as primary litigants in that. And I think, though, that Tom Brady's relationship with Brian Flores and the fact that he seems to be the football decision maker for Las Vegas and isn't your standard stereotypical owner who isn't really a football guy but is a big, tech or business guy that just hires the right people in the right place. The boys club wants to keep him out. Tom Brady, I don't think, is necessarily a part of that boys club. He has money for sure, but I think he's going to be primarily football focused and isn't going to give in to some of that pettiness that we've seen from the other owners in shutting out Brian Flores from another head coaching job over the past couple of seasons because of this ongoing lawsuit. So I think it's Brian Flores. I think he brings a meanness that you would associate with the Las Vegas Raiders. I think he'll bring a good defense. People forget, in 2023, Minnesota did not have a lot going for it on the defensive side of the football in terms of players for him to work with. And he made adjustments, and there was a time that season where Brian Flores' defense was a top unit in terms of EPA. Now, it kind of broke down there towards the end because the Vikings had been eliminated from playoff contention and not as many people were playing because, at that point, some of the injuries that if you were a playoff team, you'd play through. If you're not a playoff team, you decide to not play through. But the toolbox became a little bit empty. But there was a time where he figured everything out with a bunch of no-names and was able to get that defense going. And in fact, shut out Las Vegas in a 3-0 Vikings win in primetime in Las Vegas. So I think Brian Flores would be the perfect match for the Raiders. Moving on to number 4, it's the Cleveland Browns. And the Browns are an interesting team because this last draft for them with Andrew Berry was very big. And it had a lot of hits. You've got Harold Fannin. You've got Mason Graham, who didn't put up big sack numbers, but still was getting in there against the run and creating pressure. You also brought in Quinshon Judkins, who has already taken over as the starting running back and the heir apparent of Nick Chubb. Then you have Dylan Sampson behind him, also rookie. Then you have the 2 rookie quarterbacks. Dylan Gabriel did not look good. Shedeur Sanders mostly did not look good, but had some moments. It was a solid draft, and you have a bad team, but a good foundation to try and build something out of. So some guys I have there is a CEO type guy and an offensive type guy with Mike McCarthy. Then we also have Jeff Hafley, the Green Bay Packers defensive coordinator. He could really transform that defense to become even better than it currently is. One of the top defensive units in the league. He could make it even better with some of his blitz packages. But why not just stick with Jim Schwartz? I understand he's a guy that, didn't have very much success, to say the least, when he was the head coach of the Detroit Lions. But some of the defensive play calls that I said, like that Jordan Love interception early in the year, where they tricked Jordan Love. They tricked Matt LaFleur to throwing it to a covered guy by just mixing up their man coverage, by lining up one man on the opposite side of the field, and he was responsible for a man on the other side. So that allowed some trickery and confused Jordan Love, and it ended up in that interception. Keep him around. And also, I feel like this is a team that likes to dip its hands. The owners like to dip their hands in a little bit more. I think the owner's probably responsible for one of the 2 quarterback picks, whether it be Dylan Gabriel and Shedeur Sanders. And Jimmy Haslam, of course, also responsible for that Deshaun Watson trade, the major driving factor behind that, the driving force behind that, rather. So you have an owner that probably wants a yes man, and you have a guy that really won't get another head coaching job because of the disaster that was the Detroit Lions during his tenure, in Jim Schwartz. This is potentially his one shot. You give it to him, he's going to be your ultimate yes man, but he's also going to design a good defense. It'll be Jim Schwartz as the next head coach of the Cleveland Browns. So those are your top 4. Going on to number 5, we've got the New York Giants, and they also have a good toolbox to work with. In fact, the last 2 drafts have been pretty kind to the Giants, and I think that is what has kept Joe Shane's job, despite him letting Saquon Barkley walk and having that being broadcast all over Hard Knocks. I think that Joe Shane is here because he was able to draft Jackson Dart. He was able to get Abdul Carter. He was able to, in free agency, bring in Paulson Adebo, and was, very, very pivotal in, Drew Phillips. And Theo Johnson has found success. Those guys of this last couple of draft classes, and of course, Malik Neighbors. So you perhaps even have a better foundation and are in a bigger market, although a market that brings a little bit more pressure. And what I really want, I know that Jackson Dart is a young quarterback, and you want to make sure you do not waste his development. You want to bring in somebody that can really help develop him as a full quarterback. Cliff Kingsbury could be that guy. We saw Cliff Kingsbury with what he's done with running quarterbacks that are slighter of frame with Kyler Murray and Jaden Daniels, and that is find success early, but also because of the nature of a Cliff Kingsbury offense, find success at the cost of some major injuries to your quarterback. Jackson Dart, bigger frame, has taken a lot of hits already this season. That doesn't mean he's not going to get injured if Cliff Kingsbury is his guy, but it certainly could be an option. But I also think you're wanting to protect your franchise quarterback if you're the New York Giants. So for me, that might take Kingsbury a little bit more out of the running, but I could see him as a potential name there. And then defensively, Vance Joseph and Chris Shula are some guys that I like. I think if I'm the Giants, I want a guy that can rally this defense, that has Abdul Carter, that has Dexter Lawrence, Kayvon Thibodeau, Brian Burns, all in its front seven. You want to rally those guys together, and you want to maximize that, because if they can put pressure on quarterbacks up to the potential that they should be able to, then that defense is a top unit in the NFL. And everything else falls into place a little bit more, and that gives more of a cushion for Jackson Dart. And again, you can bring in a solid offensive coordinator. So I'm going to go Chris Shula because he is able to create pressures both with blitz packages and without blitz packages. And he does a lot of adjustments, a lot of preparation for his defenses. He's the Los Angeles Rams defensive coordinator. They don't have the top blitz rate in the NFL, do the Rams, but they have a decent blitz rate. But they also get pressure when they're rushing just 4 and bringing simulated pressures at you as well. And I also think it helps for Chris Shula that he has the Shula name in a city like the Big Apple where you're going to want a big name guy. And Chris Shula can remind you of the days of Don Shula. Obviously, he wasn't the quarterback with New York, or the coach with New York, but a big name in the football world nonetheless is Don Shula, and Chris Shula, his grandson, I think would be a good fit there in New York. Let's go to Miami, where today they, again, fired head coach Mike McDaniel. And I think Miami, much like Cleveland, could just go and give it to their defensive coordinator, Anthony Weaver. I think Clint Kubiak is an option here. I think Mike McCarthy is an option here. I think Jesse Minter is an option here. But for me, that was a defense that was greater than the sum of its parts. Whereas the Giants' defense last year was probably less than the sum of their parts, the Miami Dolphins' defense was greater than the sum of their parts. That doesn't mean they were a good defense by any means, but it means that they were better than they should have been based on the names on the field. And you can probably credit a lot of that to Anthony Weaver and what he was able to do. And I think the fact that the Dolphins always seem to get high grades on those end-of-year NFLPA surveys when it comes to the coaching staff. I think now that you fired Mike McDaniel, who led that coaching staff, it would be smart to keep as much of that coaching staff that you can in place. And Anthony Weaver would be that guy because you don't want to completely have this locker room turned inside out. So Anthony Weaver, for me, would be the guy for the Miami Dolphins. Just keep him in-house. Now let's go to Tennessee, and this is where you absolutely, no matter what, want to make sure that Cam Ward is your guy. You want to bring in an offensive guy. Joe Brady, Clint Kubiak, once again. Those guys can bring in the offensive systems. They can bring in the wide zone system or Joe Brady's complex system of route concepts that he likes to intermingle. But what you want to build on most for Tennessee is that head coach quarterback relationship that you kind of wasted with Brian Callahan. And this is where I think you bring in a division rival now, but Grant Udinski. I think this is a spot where a 31-year-old head coach can get who's been rising through the ranks like a rocket ship, can really get his first opportunity. It would be Grant Udinski for me to become the head coach of the Tennessee Titans. And I think he could work wonders with Cam Ward and really let Ward reach his true potential. And then finally, for me, the least desirable head coaching spot is the Arizona Cardinals. I live in Arizona, and while the winters here, are great, and that alone makes it pretty desirable, I just don't know the direction of this team. I think there's a lot of decisions that need to be made. And you have to decide whether Kyler Murray sticks around. And granted, you have to, in Miami, decide if Tua sticks around. But you also have a general manager kind of overhang. Whereas Miami is bringing in a head coach and general manager at the same time, so there won't be that overhang where, if the guy that brings you in is on the hot seat, you could also be on the hot seat. If Monty Ossenfort, who's keeping his job, is on the hot seat and gets fired after 1 year, the head coach that he picked probably isn't going to last much longer. So I think in terms of job security, I think in terms of not having a ton to play with in your sandbox, I think this is the least desirable spot. And you want a guy that is going to make a good quarterback decision. I don't know if Kyler Murray will be back. I doubt that he is. But I also think a lot of that is going to come down to the head coach. And I also think this is a spot where you're mostly going to get guys who aren't wanting to waste their first shot, but are getting their one last chance. For Matt Nagy, perhaps. And for Thomas Brown, who has not been a full-time head coach, but was the interim head coach of the Chicago Bears and has always kind of been since 2021, 2022, a name that has been rising up the ranks as a next potential head coach in the NFL. But things didn't go well for him as the interim in Chicago at the end of last season, only winning 1 game. Matt Nagy, obviously, with Chicago previously as well, had issues of his own with some less than dynamic offenses. And since he's been back in Kansas City, I know Andy Reid is mostly the play caller there, but since Matt Nagy has been back in Kansas City, that offense has become more stale than any offense under Patrick Mahomes has the right to be. But I also think you could get a guy with his third chance in Mike McCarthy. And I think that's the right choice for the Arizona Cardinals. You want a guy that is known, a known commodity, who's had success, so that if Monty Ossenfort is fired after this season or 2 seasons from now, he has a little bit more job security than, say, a first-time head coach who was Monty Ossenfort's guy would have. Mike McCarthy has also built great teams in Dallas and in Green Bay. We forget in 2005, the Packers were 4-12. It was their worst season. He comes in 2006, and yeah, they only go 8-8, but the year after, they're in the NFC Championship game. And that's what Mike McCarthy's done. He had success with Dallas until Dak Prescott got injured last year, and that's when the success kind of started to go downhill a little bit. He is a known commodity that will hopefully make smart decisions, and at the very worst is a good bridge head coach to get you over until you are in a spot where you are a more desirable market to be for head coaches to come to. So Mike McCarthy would be my guy for the Arizona Cardinals. So just to sum up before we move on to our playoff previews, Baltimore, Kevin Stefanski. Atlanta, Atlanta, John Harbaugh. Vegas, Brian Flores, which would be sad for me as a Vikings fan. Jim Schwartz for Cleveland. Chris Shula for the Giants. For Miami, we're going Anthony Weaver. Grant Udinsky for Tennessee. And for the Arizona Cardinals, Mike McCarthy as the next head coach. Again, these are not based on reports, although it is based on CBS's reporting of guys that have already had requested or that teams have requested to interview or that are likely to request to interview, according to CBS Sports and their reports. But these aren't necessarily the favorites in those head coaching races. Those would be my favorites for those particular teams. Let's transition over to what should be a wild weekend in the NFL. Super wild card weekend. 2 games on Saturday, 3 games on Sunday, and 1 game on Monday night. And some of them pretty good, some of them rematches. Some of them stinkers, like this first one that we'll talk about, I think. We'll start with Saturday. The Rams and the Panthers will kick us off. And I know the Carolina Panthers, A, are playing at home, and B, already beat the Rams this year. But I'm hard-pressed not to see that as a fluke. And for a team that has had its up and downs really throughout the year in the Carolina Panthers, and granted, they've beat a lot of good teams this year. The Green Bay Packers as well. Bryce Young has looked good. He has looked bad. And it seems to be 50-50 what you're going to get. And I just like my chances with the consistency that Matthew Stafford has had all throughout the season. One of his only bad games was against this Panthers unit, yes, but for the most part, he has been solid all season long and has brought a more consistent level of play than Bryce Young has brought to the Carolina Panthers. And while this Panthers team has had its moments in stopping the run, according to Next Gen Stats, most of those best moments, or the run defense is at its best when they are going up against a run from the shotgun formation, and the Rams run under center more than any other team in the NFL. And they find a lot of their success with their 13 personnel sets. And I think those 13 personnel sets with the tight ends, extra tight ends on the line of scrimmage, kind of blows up the strength of Carolina's run defense, which is tight fronts and bare fronts, where you have the three defensive tackles with Ashawn Robertson and Derek Brown and Tashawn Wharton and Bobby Brown III, whoever's on the field. You have all of those guys lined up within the tackles, with one of them right over the nose and one of them shaded inside of each tackle. Those tight fronts work when you are trying to disrupt outside zone, inside zone, some gap coverages. It makes it harder for those guards to kind of get moving and get to their spot on timing blocks. So, however, the Rams run like blast and duo and these man scheme runs where it is you are going to block this man no matter what. I think it's going to be harder for Carolina to get disruption there. So I think the Rams are going to be able to kind of have their way a little bit more running the football. And Davante Adams, by the way, full participant in practice, so not great news for the secondary. You have one really good corner in J.C. Horn that, and I know their other cornerback also, had a couple of interceptions against Brock Purdy in that San Francisco game, but he's not J.C. Horn. J.C. Horn can also sometimes, he's one of my favorite corners, but can get some penalties. He had that one that cost him the face mask penalty against Seattle. And he's mostly going to stay on the field side. So when you're lined up on one of the hash marks, he's going to be on the side that has less space to it. That is what I've seen from J.C. Horn throughout most of the season. And you can find ways to manipulate that if you are Sean McVay and this Rams offense with both Puka Nacua and Davante Adams whenever both of those guys are on the field at the same time. So I think having both of those weapons back really is able to give Los Angeles a pretty steady win. The way for Carolina to win this game, though, is really for them to force Matthew Stafford to make the same mistakes that he did prior. And maybe bringing in a fourth defensive lineman so that you have Bobby Brown, Tashawn Wharton, Ashawn Robertson, and Derek Brown all out there at the same time. And switch to more of a 4-down lineman instead of 3-down lineman, and maybe even get those two edge rushers, linebackers on the outside as well, and commit to stopping a 6-1 with your 6-1 defense that Vic Fangio had used to slow down the Rams in plenty of times prior. You can use that 6-1 defense and slow down the running game, but you're going to be more susceptible to an MVP candidate and his two top 10 receivers in the NFL. But if you're able to have success there, you might be able to force Matthew Stafford to make those mistakes, and you get the good Bryce Young game, targeting Tet McMillan, taking advantage of what is not a great secondary by getting the ball out quickly and letting your guys go to work down the field. Jalen Coker would be a big part of that. And, of course, you can't have the running game that you had against Tampa Bay. You need Rico Dowdle and Chuba Hubbard to both be at their best. And you're going to need to take advantage of Braden Fisk's injury, push him around a little bit, and get him out of the way. And you have to make sure you are not getting Bryce Young a lot of looks against pressure. You have to make sure to minimize whatever pressure he faces. And that's a tough task against the Los Angeles Rams, but that is how the Panthers would win this game and pull off an upset. It is worth noting that there have been a couple of teams with losing records that have come into a playoff game and ended up winning that playoff game. And one of those was the 2014 Carolina Panthers. Granted, it was against a pretty bad Arizona Cardinals team that was good earlier in the year and then lost Carson Palmer for the rest of the season and was on to its second and third string quarterbacks at that time, whose names, I think it was Drew Stanton was a second string, and then he got injured. So they were on to pretty undesirable options at that point, but a win in the postseason is still a win in the postseason. And the 7-9 Seahawks, of course, in 2010, beating the New Orleans Saints, a team that had just won a Super Bowl the year prior. That's another example of a losing team beating a pretty good team in the wild card round of the playoffs. I don't think that's going to happen. I'm going to pick the Los Angeles Rams for this one. They'll get things started for us with a win on Saturday. Now, the second game on Saturday is probably the one with the most juice to it all weekend, and that is the Green Bay Packers and the Chicago Bears, the most historic rivalry in the NFL. Some might say it's the best still currently. The Falcons and Saints, Steelers, Ravens, certainly in the running there. And now it meets in the postseason for the third time. One was back in the 1940s. It might have been the NFL championship or some sort of division championship. I'm not exactly sure. But the other time in 2010, where it was the NFC championship in Chicago, and Green Bay won that game, got bragging rights over the Bears. And, you know, those bragging rights have lasted through today, and they went on to win the Super Bowl that year. This game is going to be in Soldier Field as well. The Packers, not a team that are not used to the elements. They are very good at operating in the elements and have to be good operating in the elements because of their home stadium at Lambeau Field. So I don't think that gives you too much of an advantage there. It's not a warm weather team coming to play a cold weather team. It's two cold weather teams. The path for the Packers to win this game is a dominant run game and easing Jordan Love back into the lineup. He's missed the last 2 weeks with a concussion and that he suffered in their most recent game against the Bears this year. By the way, these two teams split their season series with both games really coming down to the last play. One where Caleb Williams throws an interception to lose the game, and one where he throws an overtime touchdown to win the game. So it's Josh Jacobs really getting going, and getting going early and often, because it's a Bears defense that really struggles to stop everything and is very reliant on turnovers to have success. C.J. Gardner-Johnson, though, is ruled as out, according to the latest injury reports. And he's a guy that can create a lot of that havoc or get the that forces those turnovers or force the turnovers himself. So that's certainly a blow and certainly gives the Packers offense a higher advantage than it probably already had against this Bears defense. You know, you're wondering what you're going to get out of Jordan Love after he had been out the last 2 weeks. But the truth of the matter is, in that first half, when he was playing, that run game against the Bears was dashing the Bears. And when Malik Willis came into the game, he had good passes, and the run game dashed the Bears. Keeping that up is going to be key, and stopping the run is going to be key. So I know that's old coach speak, but that is how the Packers win this game. However, I do not think the Packers win this game. The Packers are light in their secondary. Keyshawn Nixon, he made a big play to end that first matchup between Green Bay and Chicago by leaving his man because he saw Evan Williams had left his man and had been caught up in the run game. He made a headsy play, Keyshawn Nixon did, on the play action to leave his man and go and intercept a Caleb Williams pass, or else the Bears win that game, or at least tie that game and force it into overtime. but I don't trust him on a down-to-down basis. I don't trust Carrington Valentine necessarily on a down-to-down basis. And you've got Evan Williams and Xavier McKinney. I like Evan Williams more as a downhill guy that can get good fits in the run, and I love Xavier McKinney as a ball hawk, but he hasn't been the ball hawk this year that he was last year, at least in terms of the interception production, although it was hard to match last year's as well. I'll give you that. But I think with Rome Odunze, who is a full participant today when we're recording this, a Thursday, and with Luther Burden and Colston Loveland really coming on in this last quarter, last third of the season, both having good games time and time again. DJ Moore, a full participant. Cole Kmet, who took the bulk of the tight end targets for the first 3 quarters of the season, also a very good option. You've got a cavalcade of options for Caleb Williams to work with, and he's not going to be facing as much pressure, obviously, without Micah Parsons. And granted, he did face a lot of pressure when the teams last met, even without Micah Parsons, who had been injured the week before, but he was able to get the job done. And Micah Parsons' absence has also affected the Packers' ability to stop the run, which is where it all starts for Ben Johnson. The outside zone runs. Everything works off of that, and the different ways you can get into outside zone from different formations, from different personnel groupings, using different motions to try and disguise everything, but really just putting the lipstick on the pig, and I guess that's not the right metaphor, but putting the lipstick on the pig and getting outside zone from a variety of different looks. That's what he wants to do, and the Packers' yards before contact in the 3 weeks that Micah Parsons has been out has all been greater than the season average of the Packers this season. So they are giving up more yards before even contacting the running back than they have when Micah Parsons was setting the edge. Because Micah Parsons, top 2 pass rusher in the NFL. You could argue him and Myles Garrett as 1A, 1B. I'll give it to Myles Garrett in a tier of his own, and then Micah Parsons in a second tier of his own. But he is almost as good at stopping the run and setting the edge and getting double teams in the run game. That just hasn't been the case for Green Bay. And I think that Ben Johnson is going to be able to do whatever he wants to do against the Packers defense and pushing the run game and getting the outside zone going and taking advantage of that run success by using a lot of play action and finding a lot of spots in a secondary that I don't love for Green Bay. And if turnovers are lucky, Green Bay has been unlucky with them. Chicago has been lucky with them. If it's a turnover that decides a high-scoring game, if it's a late game drive that decides it, I'm going to give the edge to Caleb Williams, the Chicago Bears, and their turnover takeaway-prone defense, rather than a Packers team that I think, has 6-7 interceptions total this year? I'm going to give the edge to the Chicago Bears, and they now will get the laughing rights, at least for the offseason, against their hated rivals. So those are your Saturday games. Rams, Bears are my picks. Bills and Jaguars get us started on a triple header of Sunday playoff football. And everything in my head is telling me to pick the Jacksonville Jaguars at home in this game because of Buffalo's defense, which is not great at tackling and not always great at covering. And you have a Jacksonville offense that is riding as high as it ever has with Trevor Lawrence and Jacoby Myers and Parker Washington these last couple of weeks, man. Like, just being that outlet guy or that intermediate and then yards after the catch guy that Trevor Lawrence can look to on those in-breaking routes. You can get to Brian Thomas now on the outside. You don't have to force him to run those in-breaking crosser routes because of what Parker Washington and Jacoby Myers both bring to that offense. I think there is a higher chance that Jacksonville wins this game because of that offensive firepower that has been brought to an even higher level with a re-energized and reformed Trevor Lawrence, who has looked unbelievable, as we mentioned earlier, in the second half of this season. But, man, I got to go with my heart. And as a Minnesota Vikings fan who can really identify with 4 Super Bowl losses, I have always had an affinity for the Buffalo Bills, and even more so since they got Josh Allen and have been, actually fun to watch. And you're not throwing Trent Edwards and J.P. Losman out there. I am going to pick with my heart, and I'm going to live vicariously through the Buffalo Bills and their fans, since the Vikings are obviously not in the playoffs this year. And I will see that Josh Allen just has a Josh Allen game. Not Josh Hines Allen. Although there was a game, I think, 2021, 2022, where Josh Hines Allen really dominated the Buffalo Bills and slowed down Josh Allen. That's when his name was just Josh Allen, and it was tough to decide which Josh Allen had a good game when you're just reading about it in the paper. But in any case, I think the quarterback, Josh Allen, is able to put together a really good performance. This is really his shot, I think. You don't have Lamar Jackson, Joe Burrow, or Patrick Mahomes in the postseason. You do have Justin Herbert, but you are the guy now. You are the best quarterback in the playoffs. And I don't think he's going to try and waste that. I don't think he's going to waste that shot. I think he's going to do everything in his power to keep this team in the game. And as much as I love the film and analysis, I'm just going with the vibe here, and I'm going to choose the Buffalo Bills. And we're going to see another worldly performance where Josh Allen carries the world on his shoulders. Next up, probably the most exciting matchup, perhaps, with the 49ers and the Eagles. 2 teams that have a lot of long-term NFL equity, obviously.
49ers and Eagles face off this Sunday at 1:30 p.m. in a playoff showdown.
Sorry about that. I think that it has a lot of juice in that way. You've got a 49ers team that is a great story this year. A 49ers team that has been incredible despite countless injuries. When George Kittle went down for a while, Jake Tongas just became George Kittle. Obviously not as good, but in effect. When Fred Warner was out for the year, Tatum Bethune, D. Winters, all of these guys just having phenomenal seasons. Credit to Robert Saleh, credit to Kevin credit to Kyle Shanahan as to what this team has been able to accomplish despite its injuries, despite, having Juwan Johnson fight through injuries, or Ricky Pearsall also fight through injuries, sometimes miss games, sometimes play in them, not knowing what you're necessarily having. And Brandon Ayuk in his whole situation, he hasn't obviously played a snap at all. They've weathered all of that and have kind of, really molded themselves to whatever sort of game they need to play. However, Tatum Bethune gets injured in that most recent game. I don't know what his status is for Sunday. And you're on to lower depths of the linebacker. If you win this game, it's because of what they have been able to do so far this season, which is Christian McCaffrey in the run and pass game, really throwing the Eagles linebackers out of sorts, and that opening up a lot more room for Brock Purdy to dissect. One of his best things is just reading the defense and distributing the football. Even if he doesn't always have the strongest arm, he is able to know where to go with the football, and that becomes a lot easier when Christian McCaffrey helps you open up all of that space. But Philadelphia's defense, Vic Fangio's defense, I think is just too good to really get caught up in all of that. I think when you have Jihad Campbell and Zach Bond, those are 2 very good linebackers that are going to give Christian McCaffrey a tough a time as he'll get this year. Jalen Carter on the defensive line. Even Nakobe Dean has had a really good season, and I know more often than not it's been coming off the edge or coming in on blitzes, but he's had a good year. You've got Cooper DeJean and Quinyon Mitchell to shore up your secondary. And DeJean can really do whatever role you need him to do. If you need him to play as kind of a safety or a downhill run fit kind of guy, or just what he is good at, best at, is the classic nickel corner position. If you need him to do that, whatever, he'll be able to do it and do it exceptionally well. Now, you probably can pick on whatever outside corner Philadelphia has opposite Quinyon Mitchell, but it's still not creating as much room for Brock Purdy to operate. And in Fangio's match quarters system, there's not a whole lot of room to operate anyway. I think it's going to give Brock Purdy a hard time. I think he's going to face the pressure. I think it's going to be, I know we've seen kind of a new Vic Fangio in terms of all the blitzes that he's been able to do this year, or at least blitzing at a higher rate than he had in previous seasons. But I think it's going back to old school Vic Fangio, rushing 4, getting pressure with 4, and just allowing the back 7 to play in great communication with one another to stop the 49ers offense that we just saw a couple of weeks ago put up 40-plus points. And then on the offensive side of the ball, I know that Philadelphia's offense has been lacking pretty much all season. Saquon Barkley has taken a step back, it seems. Jalen Hurts doesn't seem to be looking at the field very well, doesn't seem to be reading the field very well. He's got the big arm, but it just doesn't seem to be meshing well, and it's a stagnant offense. But you still got A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith. You still got those names there. And against a battered San Francisco 49ers defense, I think the Philadelphia Eagles, as much as I dislike the Philadelphia Eagles as a Minnesota Vikings fan that had to watch them, I didn't go to the Super Bowl, watch them take over Minnesota after having beaten Minnesota the couple weeks prior in their first Super Bowl run. And I don't typically ever pick the Eagles, but I think it is the time to pick Philadelphia in this game. They beat the 49ers, and I don't think the 49ers offense really gets off the ground as much in this one. But I mentioned how the 49ers would win that game. On to the Sunday night game. Chargers-Patriots. Drake May's first playoff start. Justin Herbert looking for his first playoff win. They lost last year, obviously, to Houston, and then had the big collapse against Jacksonville back in 2022. New England, a new dynasty, maybe. One of the best records in the NFL at 14-3. And it's only tiebreakers that prevent them from getting the 1 seed. The offense has been fantastic. They've been a fun team to watch. Trevion Henderson, the second half of the season, probably has given himself a chance to be the favorite in the Offensive Rookie of the Year race. And I mean, Drake May is completing high percentages of passes despite making more difficult throws than any other quarterback in the NFL. He is targeting the downfield areas of different defenses with a ton of success, with success that doesn't correspond to the league average amount of success on such throws downfield. And he's doing it without a true number one. Stephon Diggs, a very good wide receiver, and not a number one guy anymore. Kayshon Boutte, Demario Douglas, Mac Hollins, solid wide receivers, but they've become something more with Drake May. Obviously, the way to win is with just Drake May. Kind of like we said, Josh Allen doing what Josh Allen does. Drake May doing what he's done all season and playing like an MVP. And not a lot of teams have been able to stop him, outside of, for some reason, the Las Vegas Raiders. They have had a hard time slowing him down, even on their best days, and even on May's worst days. The Chargers, I think, have the team to slow Drake May down. And the reason I think that is because New England's offense relies heavily on big plays and not necessarily as much sustained drives. And that's changed a little bit as we've come towards the end of the season, especially with Trevion Henderson and Ramondre Stevenson anchoring a really strong running game these last couple of weeks. But the Chargers defense excels and is better than almost anybody at capping those big plays and allowing you to get a lot of underneath and try to just go down the field with Jesse Minter. But Jesse Minter just knowing that at some point with a high volume of plays, you're going to make a mistake. And as long as we don't allow those explosives, we're going to give our offense a shot to win this game. And I think that they are able to do that. And I think T.R. Tart, the man in the middle, who has been unheralded, I think, in this Chargers defense, but he is a big pivotal role, just clogging up rushing lanes for Trevion Henderson and Ramondre Stevenson. I mean, doing it obviously throughout the season against any running back, but in this game, he's going to do it against those two. And Dion Henley flying down, and whatever gap is open, fitting that gap, and, getting behind T.R. Tart and making the tackle. Dynamic duo, those two. I like what they bring on the defensive side of the football. I like what Derwin James can do run fitting as well. And I think that is going to make the lack of runs, the Patriots have a lack of run success and make them a one-dimensional team in this game. And I think that Justin Herbert is just a top 5 quarterback that is going to be able to get the job done against a Patriots defense that has been creating more pressure than it had kind of in the 2 seasons prior, and has had some success with its edge rushers this season, but that also, outside of, Harold Landry has kind of been a bigger name in terms of their front seven. Obviously, Milton Williams, but he's been dealing with injuries and hasn't had a long, continuous season. He's been in and out of the lineup. I think he's playing in this game. And that's a big player to watch out for, especially with this Chargers offensive line. But I don't think that New England has the personnel to take full advantage of the Chargers' weaknesses on the offensive side of the football, which is that offensive line with no Joe Alt, no Rashawn Slater, with Band-Aids and corks, basically, filling and protecting Justin Herbert this season. And I think the Chargers defense does have the personnel to fully play to their strengths, which would also force the Patriots to play into their weaknesses. So that's why I think that the Los Angeles Chargers win this game. So on Sunday, just to recap, we've got the Bills, Eagles, and Chargers winning these games here on the Grey Duck Football Show preview. Then finally, the last game of Wild Card Weekend on Monday night, the Houston Texans and the Pittsburgh Steelers. The Houston Texans are coming in on all sorts of fire on a long, long winning streak. They are rolling right now. A wild card team with a defense that just goes right at you because they can. They don't have to disguise. They don't have to switch a whole lot up because they can just stop you with their personnel. I think they are the least diverse. I think from Cody Alexander of Match Quarters showed a graph that they are the least diverse defense in terms of their coverages, their shells, their personnel. But they are also the most effective defense. And that's Will Anderson. That's Daniil Hunter on the edges. That's Denico Autry on the inside. And obviously the two outside cornerbacks might be cornerback 1 and cornerback 2 in the NFL with Kamari Lassiter and with Derek Stingley. And Jalen Petrie has been phenomenal. And the linebackers have been fantastic. Shahir having another good season. But Pittsburgh and their offense do things differently. And they kind of do what the Rams like to do in running with these heavy jumbo formations. In fact, bringing in an extra offensive tackle as one of their tight ends in 12 and 13 tight end sets, personnel sets. And I know Darnell Washington isn't there, and he was a big key to all of that success, but they've proven to be able to get a run game going and not having to pass the ball as much. So I think getting that run game going with those jumbo sets is able to neutralize a little bit of what the Houston Texans defense really does well, and that's getting after the pass rusher and locking down your top two wide receivers on the outside of the field. Houston's run defense hasn't been bad, but it's not as good as its pass defense, obviously. And even when the Steelers do pass the ball, you're not usually targeting outside wide receivers. Aaron Rodgers throws an exorbitant amount of his passes to the tight end or just to checkdowns to Kenneth Gainwell, who is able to get the underneath zones and just make people miss after that and not get big 15-yard plays, but get 6-7 yards at a time so that your offense is at the very least always on schedule. So that neutralizes Kamari Lassiter and Derek Stingley. Gives Jalen Petrie a very good opportunity. But you can kind of play away from his side, whatever side of the field he lines up on. So there's the other part of that, which is that Aaron Rodgers gets the ball out very, very quickly, quicker than any quarterback in the NFL this season. It has just been a phenomenal job by him, obviously, in getting it out whenever he is going up against a defense that likes to get pressure on quarterbacks, like Myles Garrett and the Cleveland Browns, like Minnesota with Brian Flores. He knows that, and he takes advantage of it by getting the ball out less than 2 seconds after he receives the snap. And I think that he is probably going to be able to do that again and really neutralize the other two playmakers in Will Anderson and Danielle Hunter. And I think that because of that, they're going to be very limited in what they do defensively in this game, and they can't necessarily get to all that makes them the top defense in the NFL. And on the other side, I just think that Pittsburgh's defense, it's old, but it has been effective, especially recently. And especially on that line of scrimmage with Herbig, with TJ Watt, with Hayward, with Derek Harmon. And the Texans' offensive line has improved over time as the season has gone on. But it hasn't still been that great in protection. And Houston's formula to winning these games during this win streak has been getting that run game going, setting up different pass protections that don't require us to win one-on-one necessarily, and not be these true pass sets, being play action, being one-step, three-step drops, being screenplays. And by keeping yourself on schedule in the run game, you are able to kind of maneuver your way around a bad pass protecting offensive line. But against Pittsburgh, I think they are able to stop that with their front seven. Getting the pressure. Derek Harmon, who has been a monster against the run this season since coming back from his injury. I think they're able to slow that down. I think you're going to get Houston in more off-schedule downs and distances. And I think that puts a lot more pressure on C.J. Stroud. It forces him to have more five-step drops and deeper drops and gives Pittsburgh the opportunity to now take advantage of standard pass protection sets, which Houston hasn't necessarily been good at, and limit what the Texans' offense is able to do. So I have the Pittsburgh Steelers winning this game. And the key for Houston is to really push Derek Harmon around, get the run game going, and stick to that formula that has won them games, and also match personnel when they're on defense with Pittsburgh's personnel, even if that means Will Anderson and Danielle Hunter aren't on the field as much when those jumbo packages are out there. And they probably still are going to be on the field during that time. But getting, for a lot of those plays at least, but getting those your own jumbo set up there, getting more interior defensive linemen lined up, that was something that when the Vikings played Pittsburgh, Brian Flores, his maybe one fault all season was refusing to match personnel and really getting pushed around all day against an offensive line that had 5 offensive linemen, 2 tight ends, and then a swing offensive lineman. So 6 offensive linemen on the line of scrimmage. If you're Houston, you match personnel and you try to stop that. I don't know if they are going to change because they haven't changed what they've done so far this season. They have not shown that tendency. Maybe they do, and maybe they're able to find success. But I think that Pittsburgh is going to win a back-and-forth low-scoring game at Acrisure Stadium. So that is our playoff preview for Wild Card Weekend. We've got the Rams, we've got the Bears, we've got the Bills, the Eagles, the Chargers, and the Steelers winning their games, moving on to the divisional round, where the Denver Broncos await and the AFC and the Seattle Seahawks await in the NFC. Here's the plan for this week. We are going to record on Saturday, record on Sunday, and record on Monday at the end of each of these games. Recap what we saw. We can see if I am a giant buffoon that really can't analyze games, or we'll see if I can, be a little braggadocious. Or maybe I'm right and the way that I got there wasn't right, or maybe I'm wrong, but the process was right. Who knows? We'll talk about it. We'll be accountable. And hopefully we'll have some great games to discuss on, again, Saturday night, Sunday night, and Monday night with the podcasts up as soon as we finish recording. And then we will be back next Thursday to preview your divisional round games for next weekend and also see what head coaches have been hired at this point and to see if maybe with some of the playoff teams that are losing, maybe some other coaching jobs become available as well. That is coming your way next time we are here next week. We will see you on Thursday. It has been a fun one. I'm Josh Kolodziejski. This has been the Grey Duck Sports Football Show here on the Grey Duck Sports Network.